Welcome to Planning for Success, Building or Defending a Proposal with Evidence in Mind. Lesson 1, Getting Started. This video series is a precursor to the Monitoring the Success of Your Efforts training. In that training, we focused on addressing the question, how do you know if what you're doing is working? But before we get to that question, we really ought to step back and ask the question, how can you select an approach or initiative that is likely to help? These trainings deal with a number of topics related to planning and monitoring your efforts. Proper planning, which includes a needs assessment, will help you to determine where your needs exist and what the root causes of those needs are, and then enable you to select an approach that is likely to be effective. After you select an approach, you'll want to monitor your efforts. Developing a monitoring plan will enable you to build and measure the level of participant or staff buy-in, examine the level of implementation, determine the effectiveness of your efforts, determine whether your goals were met, and potential cost effectiveness. Planning and monitoring are part of a monitoring process. The monitoring process reflects a continuous improvement process. You'll want to start by studying your data to determine where your needs exist and what the root causes of those needs are. And then identify a strategy that is evidence or research-based. That is the focus of the Planning for Success series. In the Monitoring the Success of Your Efforts series, which is a separate Blackboard series, I will take you through the remainder of the monitoring process, including developing a monitoring plan, monitoring your initiative, examining findings, summarizing trends and results, and refining your efforts based on those results. The objectives for this training will focus on your initial steps in the monitoring cycle. So by the end of this training series, you'll understand how to establish the need within Wake County, have knowledge of where to find evidence or research naturally to inform your selection of your initiatives, and understand why and how to include this information when building a business case or sharing program updates. In order to ensure we are all speaking a common language, we would like to clarify two most common types of initiatives. Frameworks provide a structure or process to follow, but the guidelines are flexible on how to implement these. Examples of frameworks include things such as the Daily Cafe, Sheltered Instructional Observation Protocol, Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, while programs have tighter guidelines and are more specific. Examples include Letterland and Achieve 3000. So if planning and monitoring are so critical to our success, how do we know which way to proceed? We need to use evidence to direct our efforts. Evidence-based practice represents a paradigm shift, whereby professional decision-making is informed by judicious and explicit use of the best scientific evidence available. In order to use an evidence-based practice, practitioners must have easy access to information, such as current research. Practitioners must also have resources and knowledge of methods for monitoring, such as knowledge of appropriate indicators, and integrate both existing research and research methods into practice. Last but not least, they need to have access to technology and data. We understand that there are barriers to implementing an evidence-based practice, and whether your barriers are that you live in the Pacific Northwest and you're subject in an elusive Bigfoot, as in our example here, or that you have some more commonplace barriers, such that we have in Wake County. One barrier within Wake County that we often face is we view data analysis as separate from real work. An example of this is if a teacher says, I don't have time to gather data, I have to teach. That same teacher would never say, I don't have time to review the curriculum, because they understand the importance and how the curriculum is an integral part of what they do. So we need to build that understanding as far as data, looking at data is concerned. Another barrier is we believe data are collected for other people's purposes. And so we might view it in terms of compliance, so that we're collecting data for someone else rather than to strengthen implementation or to make sure our goals are being met. Another barrier is we believe that we already know the problem and its causes, so evidence gathering is unnecessary. This is evident when we have an over-reliance on anecdotal data, such that one principal may report that students really liked a program and thereby it might be adopted at another school, but evidence of whether it met its goals or improved the needs that were identified are not clear. Additional barriers that we often find are things such as data being defined too narrowly as quantitative. Thus we overlook qualitative forms of data such as classroom observations, which can inform our implementation. Another barrier may be that our data may not be easily accessible. The lack of a centralized data warehouse can make it a challenge to access data. It may also be that there are members of the staff who do not have access to certain data sources, making it more difficult for us to make database decisions. Another barrier may be that we have had negative experiences with data. So prior experiences such as poor data collection procedures in another program at another time, or maybe even poor experiences in high school or college. Also, being confused about which data to use is also a barrier within our system. We need to get past those barriers and make sure that we can implement an evidence-based practice which fits nicely into a continuous improvement cycle. By now, you're very familiar with the idea that the monitoring process is a continuous improvement process. We all want our efforts to be helpful and effective as possible. So whether we're using a plan, do, study, act, or the study, reflect, plan, do cycle, or the TIPS model as pictured here, the important thing is that we remember that monitoring and planning is a process in which we establish a need, create a plan for monitoring our efforts, implement your plan, and then use your findings to revise your efforts. This lesson focused on providing an overview of planning for success. In Lesson 2, we'll focus on identifying needs and root causes. Lesson 3, selecting an evidence-based or research-based approach. And finally, in Lesson 4, focusing on building a case or sharing updates with evidence. Thank you.